What's up, everybody? Welcome to your latest installment of the Nuclear Barbarians podcast. It's me, your nuclear barbarian, Emmett Penny, and I am here with Alan Medsker, a guy that I've been in contact with for a while who has been turning the tide against the state moratorium against nuclear in Illinois. Alan, happy to have you on. How's it going?
Thanks for having me. It's been going pretty well.
Yeah, it seems like it. It seems like there have been some positive steps. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask, because I'm always interested in other nuclear advocates' origin stories. How did you become the kind of guy who is whining and dining representatives in Springfield, Illinois, about the benefits of nuclear?
Well, it's it goes back to thorium, believe it or not.
Really?
So yeah, so I actually have one of my thorium shirts here, my TEA Thorium Energy Alliance shirt. The latest. So I could wear one of those every day and not wash for 2 weeks and still not run out of t-shirts, I think. So anyway, my son, who's a civil engineer and works on nuclear plant structural stuff. But before he was that, he was a college student, and he sent me a video once, and it was the Kirk Sorensen video. Kirk Sorensen being the advocate of the lifter concept of nuclear reactors. So the liquid fluoride thorium reactor was kind of his idea. He picked up a book off a shelf once and at NASA when he worked there, and learned about those and decided that was what he wanted to dedicate his life to doing. And he's a very compelling speaker, and he's really good on camera, and he's quite intelligent. He's literally a rocket scientist. So there you go. So that was kind of my gateway into my gateway drug into nuclear. And I sometimes don't put it that way, but that's that concept is definitely what it's what hooked me. And it was a Gordon McDowell video, I believe, and he's got so many of those out there now, and he's like the world's biggest influencer.
Yeah, Gordon seems to be sort of everywhere, and hugely influential. But let me ask you this: were you basically an undecided on nuclear? Were you an where were you?
I didn't really have a strong opinion about it. I remember once upon a time, probably multiple decades ago, thinking, we probably shouldn't build any more of these because we don't really know, that there might be a disaster. I was thinking to myself,
Sure.
And kind of the typical, the line that the public hears so much, because it's kind of the default line from the mainstream press. They're always looking for a big headline, and that's kind of what they do. So I have an engineering background. I'm a double E by training, and do software and computers and telecommunications and stuff by day. So I've always been interested in how things worked and fixing things. And when climate change started to come around, I started to pay a little bit more attention. When it was starting to be a thing, and this video and the research that I did on my own, quote unquote research, right? Watching a bunch of YouTube videos, right? It's like poor man's research, I guess, maybe, without citations. I watched a lot of those. I hung out on Facebook in the nukes group there. There's some professional nuclear people up there, and they graciously allowed me to be in their group. And some really smart people. And I soon realized that what we had already running, no liquid fluoride, fluoride thorium reactors, no fancy things by today's what we would call advanced reactors. But they were just really, really good. Like the ones that we have are, they have fantastic safety records, got fantastic uptime, reliability. They've got fantastic. They're really, they're very cost effective, and they offer really good jobs. And there's just all these benefits that that are there, and we don't need to invent or develop something new, to make a big impact. That's not to say that we shouldn't be doing that.
Sure, sure.
So and that was in fact my gateway, right? And I still want to see those things happen. I want to see advanced reactors happen, but they're a ways off, and we don't have any guarantees about how easy or hard or expensive or cheap they're going to be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything's cheaper and safer on paper.
Right. So, so that's kind of the road that I took to get to the advocacy point of view. And then a mutual friend of ours, Michael Schellenberger, posted on Facebook one time back in 2014 or so, said, "Hey, there's some interesting things in Illinois that are going to be happening. DM me if you're interested." And so I did, and he ended up coming out here, and I ended up working with him and a few other people to try to save the Clinton and Quad Cities nuclear plants. And we were successful in doing that. And I should say we, I mean, the ComEd and Exelon still had some significant lobbying pull back then. I suppose they still do, but they were. This is kind of before the whole thing blew up on them. With
the scandal.
The scandal of Michael Madigan speaker and all that stuff. But they made sure that
Illinois
there were
politics.
I tell you what, it's nothing if not interesting, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So that was really a lot of fun. So we jammed a bunch of people into this 19-passenger rental van, and one of them was James Hansen, who Michael interviewed the entire way down there. We had a professional video team jammed into that van too.
Wow, what a
recording
story.
This interview. So we're barreling down I-55, to get down to their to that plant to visit it and talk to the employees. And Robert Stone was in there. I mean, it was really a lot of fun, and it was fun to meet those people and to have that experience. And that was from my first taste of lobbying in Illinois. We actually had a professional lobbyist that we hired for a day or two to take us in and around and into literally the dark annals of the State House.
Yeah.
I remember we just there was I'm not sure that I could have made my way out without somebody leading me. I mean,
right.
It was just there was
all those smoky back rooms.
Pretty much, yeah. And so anyway, we talked to people, and eventually the bill got passed. It was mostly not nuclear energy related. It was just this one little relatively small piece in it. And what I like to say about that bill is that there's about $320 million, I think, that every year that got spent on the subsidies for those two nuclear plants to keep them open. And together they provide, 12, 14, 15% of the electricity in the state, right? I mean, just those two plants, right? And and then we spent a similar amount of money trying to get solar, mainly solar work, working. That was kind of the focus there, and that money eventually ran out, and that's why we did the CEJA bill later, which we'll perhaps get to. But there's this solar cliff, they called it, right? So all the money ran out, and so now the solar folks weren't starting any new installs because they didn't, have that subsidy. And so I say, well, you have a in the teens percentage of your electricity that you kept online with this $320 million or whatever it was. That's off the top of my head, and about the same amount of money that we spent on solar, and the amount of solar that we currently have in the state. All that was subsidized by that, and everything else that might have been installed separately or without the subsidies or whatever, is like rounded to the nearest whole percent is zero, right? I mean, so it's we got a lot more for our money with the subsidies to the nuclear plants, and you don't really I mean, nobody talks about that. Nobody says that.
No, I mean, that's way more bang for your buck. So let me ask you this, like, those sort of early days, because I think everybody here knows that I worked for Michael Schellenberger at one point, and I sort of came in a little bit after Save Diablo gets started,
Right.
a few years after this experience you had in Illinois, and a lot has changed in 5, 6 years when it comes to nuclear advocacy. What was it like for you back then? And just tell me a little bit about the history of what you've seen change when it comes to talking about nuclear. I'm always fascinated in this question.
It's, I'm not sure I could put my finger on one thing. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that you have some narrative to back you up now that you didn't have then, right?
Mm.
And that's, for me, that's pretty huge, right? I mean, because we have the lovely experience of Germany, for instance.
Right,
And
right, right.
we're fond of comparing them to France, and
Mm-hmm.
we say the Illinois is kind of the France of the U.S., right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to lots of nuclear, and so that's made a difference. I mean, certainly since the conflict in Ukraine has started, and lots of energy has gotten scarce or expensive or both.
Mm-hmm.
We now have, I mean, it's on people's radar that it wasn't on before. You have, significant, seemingly small, but still significant changes in the way that, what Germany even is doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they've delayed some stuff. The Germans just do not like to change their minds, right? I mean,
Yeah, stubborn.
they really don't. And so there's that. There's climate change isn't going away,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's continues to be an issue. But now we have, you know, the Texas storm a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
we have people
nuclear was one
talking
of the
about,
best performers in that.
right. It was, and people are talking about blackouts, and they weren't talking about that before. And the RTOs, the PJMs and the MISOs of the world are, which are the two here in Illinois. We have both of those.
Yeah, yeah,
Those
we do.
RTOs are here. So I think back in the day, ComEd lobbied to get into PJM with their nuclear plants, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's why you have this tendril of PJM that reaches up into Illinois and grabs those
Mm-hmm.
areas. I always compare it to like the way that Chicago reaches out and grabs onto O'Hare Airport, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there's
right.
just like this. It's like a frog and a fly, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
you have both of those organizations that have been pretty vocal about there being some significant risk to their reliability, right? And so there's not
Yeah,
a
I was actually, just to add to that real quick, I was just looking over a letter that Commissioner Danley at FERC had written late last year, and he was saying he did a really good job of documenting what the major problems with the grid were, and he was specifically focusing on self-reports from PJM and MISO about
Mhm.
what their capacity shortfalls were going to look like over the next few years as the resource mix changed from reliable and dispatchable to intermittent, non-dispatchable, and renewable.
Mhm.
Um, and it seems to really bolster the case for nuclear by scaring the hell out of everybody.
Well, and and I don't like that tactic,
No, neither do I. I would
but
like.
I'm perfectly willing to take advantage of it if I'm given the opportunity. But it wouldn't be my choice, right? I don't.
No,
I
I would rather grid
No.
operators make that case
Right.
technically
Right.
rather than scaremonger. Like, am I worried about it? Yes. Do I want to catastrophize about it? No, because that wasn't
Right.
productive for climate, and it won't be productive for advocating
Right.
for grid reliability.
Yeah.
So, so okay, so all of these things have happened, and we've also had the arrival of people like Isabel Bemeke. We've
Hmm.
also, I mean, I'm very excited for Oliver Stone's movie,
Hmm.
which is gonna, I think that'll be big as well. Frankie Fenton just had a movie come out, so it seems like there's this narrative shift. We've got all that, and one parts of that narrative, because you mentioned this, and I wanted to ask you about it very directly, was what happened with Byron and Dresden in Illinois. and how those plants
Mhm.
got saved. So it seems like you just had a repeat of the success the first time
Um,
around. I'm sure it's more complicated than that. So why don't you fill us in?
well, and it's the first time it was pretty much Exelon got the verbiage in that they wanted. There was some other arguments that people had about other aspects of the bill, and that was a last minute pass as well in the veto session. So it was in December.
Yeah.
The last chance they had to do that. It wasn't the last day that that Clinton or Quad had to be they were going to pull the plug the next day,
Right, right. Yeah. You
like
had a
how
little cushion.
yeah like they were with Byron. So but then it was I really got the feeling that and I was even told, I think explicitly, that um, that there was a pretty strong expectation that they would get the subsidy and they wouldn't have to worry about it, right? So they knew that was going to happen, and that was perhaps them leaning on their past performance and getting legislation done that they wanted to have done. Exelon's one of the most effective lobbyist organizations in the world, probably, right? So,
Hmm.
or ComEd, I should really say.
Yeah.
Um, and so they were successful, and there were people that wanted it, and many of them were Democrats. I mean, this is Illinois, so because we have so much nuclear, we have actual Democratic members of the state house, senators and reps that are strong believers in having nuclear energy, and certainly in the plants, some of which are in maybe even their exact district, right? I mean, so
Right.
they've got most of
They're
them are
familiar.
right. Most of those are in Republican districts that have voted Republicans in office, but not all of them.
Hmm.
And the ones that are around, even if they're not in your district, a nuclear plant still affects your district because there's so many people that work there, and the economic benefits are so big. People that are next door, don't want it to close either, right? So,
Yeah. They've got skin in the game, right?
right, right.
They got to bring home the bacon for their
Yeah.
constituents.
Some of them even have, I mean, I talked to one rep or a senator, whose father worked on building one of those plants. I mean, so
Wow.
you have those connections, and and they're pretty strong. So we do, that does make us a little bit different than a place like, say, California,
Hmm.
where pretty much it's a very, very bright line in between the red side and the green side, or the red side and the blue side. Neither of which is necessarily completely green, if depending on how you look at that, I
Yeah,
guess,
sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
But 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 here it bleeds over. It bleeds over quite a bit more, and
Right. It's a little more purple in Springfield when it
yeah.
comes to this issue.
But it's nuclear is the bipartisan issue of our time. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is, and we've got right now, as I speak, we've got um, close to a majority of the Democratic representatives that are backing that we know are backing the bill, either because they sponsored it or because they told us that they would vote for it, to repeal the moratorium on the nuclear plants. So,
Right. And that
which,
moratorium has been around since the 1980s. I believe it was
mhm.
put in by a Republican governor. Um, and seemingly because out of defense for the coal industry. Um, and
Yeah.
it's now it seems like, tell me a little bit of the story there with this bill. What's the draw? What's bringing people to
So,
the table?
well, let me finish up with Byron and Dresden.
Oh, right. Sorry. I got
It's
too excited about the
it was
idea of the
it is
moratorium going away.
this. Welcome to having a conversation with me. This is how it always goes. So we we passed FEJA, FEJA,
Hmm.
which is the Future Energy Jobs Act, in the middle of last decade, and
Hmm.
that kept the Quad Cities plant and the Clinton plant open, and those are very specifically. It only works for those two plants, right? So, um, very, very specifically carved out for that. Um, the uh, the new bill that we passed in 2021 is called CEJA. It's a and it's a Climate Equitable Jobs Act, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
They changed it. It was the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and they changed it to still be CJA, but something else, and I can never remember those for sure. But that was a much bigger bill. It was broader. It did include a lot of equity measures for people that are more disadvantaged than I am in this life. People of color, people that live in places where they are affected by dirty coal plants and other industry that pollutes their environment, and also can't take advantage of the jobs that happen, and this solar cliff that happened with FIJA, where we ran out of money. They made sure that wouldn't happen again. So the subsidies will stretch out for a much longer period of time for the renewable energy sources that are subsidized in that. And it's just a much bigger bill. And the nuclear aspect of that was focused on the other 4 plants that we have. We have 6 nuclear plants in Illinois that are active. So that's those 4 were the ones that were at risk, and really all of them were, right? Meaning, because the gas prices had been so low for so long, and they were just getting beat up, as a corporation, you have to look at your investments and you have to say, where can I invest this money? And if there's something else that I can invest it in that'll get me a better return, then my shareholders are going to expect me to move those investments. And by moving investments, in this case, it would have meant, removing the investments from keeping the plants running and going and do something else, right? Whatever that would be. So they had been making noises about that ever since FIJA passed, so it's been we've known for a long time that those are at-risk plants. That if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm fond of saying electricity markets are stupid, and I always find a reminder for that. It's not hard to do that. Not hard to find one, and that's one aspect of that is that they allow our best generation assets to be at risk of closing, even though they're perfectly good. So the what happened with that was there were a number of bills that were put forward. CJA that we see today, the root of that bill was one of them. There was one called CUJA, the climate.
Was it like Union Jobs Act or something?
Yeah, it might have been Union Jobs. There was a CUJA, and that didn't really get very far, but it was there were some parts of it that were taken and put into CJA, and then the governor had a bill, and you say, well, the governor can't have a bill. What the heck, right? But there was a representative that on the governor's behalf filed a bill. I mean that happens, I think, regularly, So that was another one, and that was CUJA had a big benefit for Exelon Constellation in it to keep those open. It was very generous, and then the governor's bill had a very cheap one. and it was and when this was at that time, and still probably today, the Constellation isn't really invited to be an upfront part of those negotiations. Somebody goes and asks them what they need, but they don't come. My sense is that they didn't get into those rooms very often because the environmental folks and others, because of the scandal, they just didn't want to give them the time of day. And really, what it was is they didn't want to be seen with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
just like,
I think that's a really important thing to touch on. Like, in my studying of the history of what happens with nuclear, I think what gets underappreciated is the way in which a lot of people were, in some cases, very rightfully frustrated with their utilities and took it out on nuclear. That happens like over and over again, or they just don't care what happens to the plant. They're pissed. And sometimes it's because there's like a big money scandal that has to do with it. So learning how to separate those things and still make the case for nuclear is, I think, really important.
Yeah, it is. And, I mean, anytime you have a situation where you've got, large corporations that are incented, to do things that, like spend a lot of money to get a lot of money. I mean, that's the old vertical market model, right? And,
right, yeah.
And so, they were used to doing that. And even though we're not a vertical market here anymore, we're a deregulated area, but it was still, there's still, old habits die hard.
Yeah, well, I read a quote from a utility exec who said, "This is the only business I know of where you can make money by redecorating your office," which I thought was a great.
I remember that. But yeah, that's a classic. Yeah, for sure. So we, those bills had some provisions in them to keep the plants open. One of them wasn't good enough, and Exelon, told the appropriate people that that was the governor's bill, and then the other one was way too much, and the rest of the people that were in on the negotiations were saying we're not going to give them that much money. There's just no way. It was actually more than I think what they got from FIJA. So they ended up settling on something actually pretty early in the process. I think it was in April. And they, we, at that point, we knew what the provision was going to be to keep the plants open. And the whole rest of the time that it took to pass that bill, up until that day in September, which was the last day that Exelon said, if we don't hear by this date, we're going to close Byron, because they were coasting down to their fuel outage.
Right, yeah.
And so they were going to turn it off and never turn it back on again the next day if they didn't get a yea vote on the bill that day. But it took all that time to hammer out all of the other stuff that was in the bill.
Yeah.
Right. So all of that time was really did not involve any of the nuclear provisions at all. So that was kind of a nail biter, although. I think most of the people I talk to, and including myself, and I do talk to myself sometimes, the way that we felt about that was that it we weren't too worried that it wasn't going to pass, because we knew that provision wasn't in play anymore. It was, everybody had agreed to it, and it was a pretty darn good deal that we gave the ratepayers. I mean, and as you know, and perhaps our viewers don't know, there was an additional provision that was added that said if electricity wholesale prices go way up, then you have to give a bunch of that back to the ratepayers. And so I've been getting money back on my electricity bill.
Yeah, so have I. It's been no complaints. No complaints.
Right. So I mean, I think the prices are settled down a little bit, and so we don't see as much right now. But it's really that was a pretty good call by whoever it is that decided to put that in there. And I don't know how it got in there, but it was it worked out well for, I think, really everybody. I mean, I think that Constellation's perfectly happy with that, because they can continue to operate their plants without risk from a financial perspective, even with that that provision in there to get back money. So so that's kind of how that worked. We started talking about Byron and Dresden, and then it ended up being also LaSalle and Braidwood, right? It was like all four of them, right? Towards the end, it was like, none of these is gonna be good enough without some help, without a little bit of help. So they got the help, they kept them open, and I think generally speaking, everybody's pretty happy about that, with the possible exception of the anti-nuclear, the hardcore anti-nuclear folks. But even the quote unquote environmentalist group, the environmentalist environment.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that little, their bubble. I think even within their bubble, I think they're okay with these continuing to run, because many of them do understand that it's literally half of our electricity, right? That in the state that comes from those plants, and so they were okay with that. They continue to talk about, these plants are going to close when their licenses expire, and they just, they don't understand, like we understand, that you can continue to refurb and relicense those things indefinitely, right? I mean, it's, there are no guarantees, but at this point we do not know how long they're going to last, and so we're going to continue to work, and that was, we saw that, in real life when Constellation recently said they were going to do $800 million worth of upgrades on I think it's Byron and Dresden, and they're going to operate them, actually. So I mean, I don't know that we saw an upgrade. I think Watts Bar did that most recently, but we haven't seen very many of those around the country of late. So this is like adding another 115, 120 megawatts of continuous capacity between the two upgrades that they're doing. So, and of course that's from the utilities point of view, that's just they can just print more money, right?
Right. I was about to say, that's like, I mean, what's not attractive about that?
Right. So that's pretty exciting. So we were successful in that. And I always said the next thing I wanted to do was repeal the moratorium. And so I, and I've been, my history with working at the State House started that one time that we went down there, and Michael Schallenberger testified to one of the committees, and so I got a little bit of exposure then, but then I didn't really do anything for quite a while. And there's been some lobby days, so the environmental organizations kind of group together around here, and they'll hire a couple of buses and take a bunch of people down there to go advocate for one day for a bunch of environmental bills that they want, and they're doing that again this year in April. So I've done that with that group for a while and had some very interesting conversations on the bus on the way down and on the way back, because it's usually people that are deciding like, well, isn't nuclear like really old, and isn't it really too expensive, and won't it blow things up, and what about the waste and all those things. So we've there's been some opportunity for some good discussions there. There's also been some ones that that didn't go well at all. So so there you go. But so I did a little bit of that, and then I did some work with Generation Atomic. They had a campaign going here in the early CEJA days, and that was right before the pandemic happened. And actually the pandemic ended up shutting most of that activity down for everybody, really. And nobody could even go to the State House if you were if you were a politician. You couldn't go there, right? So they, so we struggled through all of that like everybody did, but in the meantime there was still work to be done, and so we did what we could. But before the pandemic, that was my first time where I really went down to the State House, and I started to spend some serious time there. My day job changed, so I was working 3 days a week for a while there. And so I took advantage of that, and we go down there for the day. And I got to tell you, I would walk around in the Stratton building and talk to whichever reps were in their offices, or their legislative aides, they were called at the time, the legislative coordinators now. But and so you have one LA that would be responsible for 3 reps usually. And on the Senate, they each get their own, their own dedicated person. But but in the House, it's a shared resource. And so you would it's a long open aisle with just a bunch of doors for offices, and then open cubicles for the legislative aides, and so you could just walk all the way from one end to the other in this long, it's like 10 or 12 offices or more, that many legislators in there. And I would just walk down and say, can I have 5 minutes to talk about nuclear energy? And to a person, it was like I was the first person that had ever talked to that representative in a positive way about nuclear energy.
Wow, really?
Just and they would have good questions. They would, none of them are dumb, right? And some of them are kind of dyed in the wool anti-nuclear, and they're not really, they're politicians, so they will listen to you, and sometimes it'll seem like they're on board, but then when you think about what they said afterwards, it's like, they didn't commit to anything.
Right. Yeah. They played it real close to the vest.
They have to be good at that, right? I mean, anybody would have to be good at that in that job. And so they are. But I learned to just, make those connections and follow up with, maybe I'd have a handout and a card. I had some cards printed up. I have some Generation Atomic cards printed up that I was working pretty closely with Eric Meyer for some things, and I've never been paid by anybody to do any of this. So you're
just out there for the love of the game.
Yeah, I'm not a lobbyist in that sense, and I don't have to register as one because of that, but which is I like it that way. And I have a campaign for Green Nuclear Deal card as well. So I work with Maddie a lot. That's what I'm doing these days.
That's great.
And so I have a card that I can give out, and that's important, right? You need to have that. We have a handout that we put together for the moratorium repeal bill, and some of the aspects of some of the benefits to our state if we do that. And so I usually have some of those these days when I go down there. But it's just a lot of fun, and it's very gratifying. And like I said, they're not dominate, and they usually have pretty good questions. And sometimes they have like a little bit of history. Well, back when I was young, you remember, I mean, I talked to a rep when I was down there last week, and she's in basically a Republican, kind of a stronghold in Bloomington, right? And anything downstate is Republican, but she's a Democrat. So she's been the first Democrat in that district for a long time, right? And she's like, I had all these constituents that were asking me about nuclear when I was campaigning. She's a freshman, right? She's brand new. And she's like, and I'm like, well, I don't know why nobody talks about it, but that's why they were saying that, why isn't anybody talking about it? Right? And she's like, I don't know it. And I'm like, well, I can tell you a little bit about why that is. And we had this lovely conversation, and we talked about the moratorium, and she's like, I remember when they did that.
Wow.
I mean, I think she was probably a young, in middle school or something at the time. She's not. She's a pretty young person now, but in '87, she would have been in school still. So she remembered, when that happened. I don't know anything about the context of why it happened. I only know what's in the bill, right? I mean, I never really went and looked into that too much, and it's not really easy to find, I don't think. So I mean, so you'll have to fill me in on what you found out later.
I think I found that out from Tim Smythe or Tim Smith, however you say it.
Tim Smith.
Smythe. Yeah, he dug up some old Chicago Tribune articles about it, and it's one of the few, I think, moratoriums that was not put into place by environmentalists working with the Democratic Party. As far as I know, there could be others out there. Nobody wouldn't be surprised. These things happen, but it wasn't like a situation where Ralph Kavanaugh over at the NRDC, took it in California all the way to the Supreme Court, and like that was this huge pitch. That was sort of his debut at the NRDC, and it was after that he went to do electricity markets.
It may have been that if we had Republican governor, then that there was just a veto override. I mean, I don't know, because we've been heavily Democratic for a
Yeah,
long time.
it seems that he was a Republican governor at the time, and I think he was like, I don't really have. He's like, I think this is the right policy. We've got coal,
Okay, all
we've
right.
got this stuff. He didn't. He really. He was for it. He didn't have any
Hmm.
objections to the
Okay,
moratorium
all
rolling
right.
out. So, I mean, that's just part of the state history here. So
Does that have like
it's
maybe Ogilvy or somebody?
yeah, I think that might have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Right.
I'd have to go back and check, but yeah, that's
Hmm.
part of the story here. And
Well, that's pretty interesting. So the again, my experience is that people just need to have a chance to talk to somebody about it. That's
yeah.
mainly the thing that's missing. And
Hmm.
so we tried to do that, and Maddie Haley and I have been scheduling calls with legislators, and we do like a half-hour Zoom call, and we just kind of go through the whole thing. We talk to them about our history, and how we came about to appreciate it, and
That's amazing.
and it's generally speaking, it's received very, very well. Sometimes we do that with a chief of staff or somebody. Sometimes we do it with the legislator themselves. I've done it with just the legislator. Um, you know,
Hmm.
it's and like I said, they ask good questions, and they I mean, they have to be, cognizant of so many issues, right? So many
Yeah.
topics, right? That and so I always try to make sure that they know that they can ask me questions later if they want to do that, right? I mean, you don't get a lot of them taking you up on that. I mean, they view me as a lobbyist, and that's probably appropriate.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm, I try to make sure that they know that I'm just a guy,
Yeah.
right? I'm not doing this to pay the bills. I'm not doing, I'm not taking blood money.
Right. Right.
Right,
Right. Right.
right.
Right.
And so so this bill, the status of what we have right now, we have House Bill 1079, and that's how that came about is last year it was filed first, and it was a different bill number then, but my rep filed it, and this was one of my favorite stories to tell. So I started to I actually worked on the campaigns of my rep and my senator. They're
Hmm.
both Democrats, and I'm a pretty blue guy. And
Hmm.
so my wife and I helped out a little bit with their campaigns. They got elected, and we were sitting in my house with my senator. She was just a candidate at the time, and there
Hmm.
were a few other people from the neighborhood. We had like a coffee and come meet the candidate thing, right? We hosted one of those things, and so people were bringing up something to talk about, something to ask about, and so everybody had kind of talked themselves out, and we weren't out of time yet. So I'm like, well, if nobody else has anything, let me talk to you about nuclear energy, and
Perfect.
that kind of started. And that was very clearly the first time anybody had ever brought that up like that
Hmm.
with her, with Senator Gillespie. Ann Gillespie was doing a phenomenal job, by the way,
Mm.
and is a supporter, but more in the back room than my rep kind
Yeah.
of thing. But that's okay. So that was um, kind of the beginning of the relationship with both those candidates that ended up getting elected.
Hmm.
And so I said, well, if I bring over lunch, can I talk to you all about, can I give you like a nuclear 101 thing, right? They're like, sure, come on, come drop by. We set a date. I went out, got Thai food, my favorite Thai restaurant, and brought it over, and we had a great lunch, and we talked about all kinds of nuclear things, and gosh, it probably went like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. I mean, it was a long,
Wow.
long
It's a
lunch,
deep
right?
dive.
Right, and we so we just started doing that once in a while, and I have means, I can buy lunch, so I did, and that's what I've been doing, and these days sometimes Maddie comes out and,
Hmm.
and joins me, and sometimes I just go do it, and I'm like, all the staffers that want to come, just Tell me,
Yeah.
here's the restaurant. Tell me what you want, right? And then we just bring it all over. And so they talked to me about, you know, how how different legislation can happen that we, that might benefit, nuclear energy and get more of it for us eventually. And so, and then I talked to them about nuclear energy, and so we had some really great conversations, and I kind of feel like a consultant a little bit, and it's
Sure. Yeah.
it is sort of that way. But the chief of staff for both my senator and my rep are like 110% on board with nuclear. They're
That's
so
great.
they're
That's
so
great.
and they're young. They're young guys. They don't, I mean, and I think we see a lot of that, right? I mean, I'm a boomer, right? I mean, I got my Medicare card, right? Right. I have a discount card to ride on the RTA now. So, I'm in a different demographic than that. And I hid under my desk during the drills when I was in grade school.
Yeah, duck and cover.
And I was located, within 10 miles of at least one Minuteman site, right? So there were nuclear missile silos all over the place where I grew up out in western Nebraska. And so we took that seriously. And I wouldn't say that it really, colored my view, but I think it does of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that that young people these days, it's, they've got lots of burdens that we've left them with, but that's not one of them.
Right. Right.
Yeah. They don't really have that anymore. So anyway, they were very enthusiastic about it and very supportive about it. And we stay in communication, and I help them out however I can, and they help me out. So anyway, one day I got a call from the staffer for my representative, Mark Walker. And he's like, "Hey, we're going to file a bill to repeal the moratorium." I'm like, "What? And because I had dug enough into it to know to find a previous attempt to do that, right? So I found the legislation that had been filed, and really that's about as far as it got, was just filed, right? I mean, it was almost nothing happened back in 2014, which is the last time this was tried. So he said, we're gonna go ahead and file it because the deadline's coming up, and so we're gonna give it a shot. And the bill there wasn't enough oxygen for lots of bills last year. There were many things that got left on the table because it just had so much other work to do, and so it did not get brought up in the veto session or the lame duck session, which they don't always have really either of those, but they had them both this past year. So the bill died, like so many others did, but then the new session started, and it got refiled as this number now, HB 1079. And we had, and last year we had a hearing on the bill, and it was a hearing in the Energy and Public Utilities Committee, no, Energy and Environment Committee. It's they're so similar, but they're different. In the House. In the House, right? So Energy and Environment Committee. There's also a Public Utilities Committee in the House.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we were in the Energy and Environment Committee. That's where it got assigned last year. We had a subject matter hearing that went very well. We had some SMEs come in and help us with that. And we got good questions, and there was one person from the Nuclear Energy Information Service, which is a local anti-nuclear storefront, and so she testified against it, but everybody else testified for it. And my good friend Alyssa Hayes testified for that. She's doctoral student in Tennessee, but she grew up in Waukegan.
Oh,
right,
okay.
next to Zion, right? So she talked about that. She talked about, and she's a person of color, right? So she just is perfect for that, to address all of those things that people want to hear about. and in a positive way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's an SME. She's like a PhD in a nuclear science program. So
Yeah.
subject matter expert. So we had a really good hearing, but that's as far as it got. This year, we got assigned to the Public Utilities Committee. That's an easier committee for us to get into and out of with this bill. The chair of that committee is a very staunch supporter of nuclear, Democrat. I mean, all the committees are democratically led. But the Energy and Environment Committee chair is not particularly friendly to nuclear. So she's and she was the chair last year. She is again this year. But we got assigned to a different committee, so that's good. And they had some substitutes on that on the day of the hearing. There was activity to manage who the substitutes were going to be with this bill in mind, right? So I mean, it's politics, doing the stuff you got to do, right? So it was, the committee was a little bit stacked, but it was an 18-3 vote. And generally speaking, again, we had the NEIS come in and did their anti-nuclear testimony, but all the rest of them were positive, were good. So the Illinois Manufacturers Association has been supportive, as you can imagine. What I did learn was that if you're talking to a Democratic rep, you don't necessarily want to bring that up, because those guys are going to be against many of the other kinds of bills that the Democrats like, right? So I would go one way or the other depending on the bill, but so there's things like that you learn. I mean, and you just see, body language over Zoom, right? When I brought that up, I just saw that this one particular time. So anyway, so we made it out of committee, and now we're waiting for it to be called for a third reading on the floor, and so we're working with just today. His office, Rep. Walker's office, told me that they're working on whipping votes.
All right.
And we have to get to a good, strong Democratic majority. Not just a majority of votes, because we'll get a lot of Republican votes, maybe all of them. But we, in order for it to get called, it's going to have to have a good, strong majority support on the Democratic side, on the blue side. So that's where we're at right now. So we've got a list of reps that we're calling, and again, just being that person that says something nice about nuclear.
Right, trying to plug away. So what happens? What happens next? Like how many more stages are left towards repeal?
So if we have a vote, so there's also a Senate bill that's been amended to be the exact same thing. So this bill just strikes 2 paragraphs from the Public Utilities Act. That's all it does, right?
Okay.
It's very, very simple, and they're not even long paragraphs, right? So it's like a half a page of text,
right,
that comes out. And so Senator Sue Rezin, who's got nuclear plants in her district, she's down by Dresden, I think. She filed a bill actually late last year, like in the veto session or something. Like, hey, you file a bill in a veto session, it's not gonna. But she had gone to some conference, and she had learned about the Indiana bill that got passed last year to support the development of SMRs to replace some of their fossil fuel generation over there, right? And that's right, the focus of that bill. So she was like, I want that bill. So she came back and she told her staffers that that's what she wanted. And so they put this bill together that had this SMR stuff in it, but it also had the removal of the moratorium because it had to, right? I mean, in order to do
right.
it.
Yeah, you have to.
Right?
Yeah.
right? So, but it had some other stuff in there too. And so I was talking to the Republican staffer that does energy work for them in the State House. And we had got connected up somehow.
Mhm.
I think I called Resident's office and she sent me over to them.
Right. That
And
makes
so
sense.
so we were talking about it, and he's like, I mean, the lawyers are saying that maybe that SMR passage in here is not really useful. Just the way that it and I read it and I can't tell, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't know. What do I know? Yeah.
I don't so anyway, so that was everybody just kind of looked at it as a something that encourages small modular reactors, right? And that was all we really were thinking about it. But this work in the background was going on with the attorneys and because there's people that make sure that the bill language is correct and all of that stuff, right? I mean that's not something that a rep or a senator is generally going to be able to do, right? So there's staff on both sides, Republican staff and Democratic staff, that it does that. And so Senator Resin eventually decided to just amend out that SMR stuff. And so now we have an identical bill, Senate Bill 76 in the Senate. And there was a hearing for that last week, Thursday, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Heard for that last week. I testified at that hearing. So anybody can sign up to do that, and they have some leeway, but generally they can let you, if they want to, do that. And so I had a prepared statement, and I just wanted to make sure that somebody spoke out in favor, right? And it turned out that they had an NEI person there. Then he spoke out in favor of course, Nuclear Energy Institute, and then the NEIS folks, the Nuclear Energy Information Service.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, NEI and NEIS, I guess it is, right? So, yeah, so he was there again. We're like on a first name basis, right? I mean,
right. At this point, you may start getting them Thai food.
I don't know. We'll see. That's he'd be a hard sell, but
yeah. No
anyway,
doubt.
so we had 15-1. We passed out of that committee, and that was a significant. So that bill is not a companion bill for the House bill.
Okay.
Even though you might think it would be. And the main reason for that is it's a Republican sponsored bill.
Gotcha.
And the Democrats are just not going to let that happen. So, so there have been provisions made for when the House bill passes on the floor. If it gets called and it passes, then it'll get sent over to the Senate as HP 1079. It'll be in the Senate. That's how that works. And then there's a placeholder bill that's been pre-filed, they call it. And so that is, they're waiting for that eventuality, right?
Gotcha.
And then they'll have, I don't think they've identified who would sponsor it on the Democratic side, but they've got people that can do that.
Right.
So presumably the people that are supporting SB 76 today would just support the new one. That's what are they going to do, right?
Yeah, I would hope so.
And it is the exact same language. There's not one character that's different.
That's amazing. I love it.
In between theirs and this one, now that it's been amended. So, so that's the next thing. We do have pretty good intelligence that there are votes there, but there's always work to be done until the vote's been taken, right?
Right, of course. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people might not realize that CEJA passed by one vote in the Senate.
Yeah, it was slim. That was slim.
Yeah, it was, and that was like some guy, some poor hapless senator with a bad Zoom connection that just, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? That was like the only reason that we got that vote.
That's amazing.
It just like, the interweb cleared up for a hot minute.
Man.
So he can be recognized.
That's amazing.
Anyway, So, it seems to be pretty popular. And I was really actually flabbergasted by the Senate vote out of that committee. I was surprised that there were a couple of non-voters. So there were Democrats, and then there was one that voted no. And but there were a lot of Democrats that voted yes on that committee. I mean, and it's a majority of Democrats on the committee, right? Because it's a Democratic supermajority in the state house, right? So all the committees are that way. So yeah, it was a good week last week.
Man, does that make me feel good? I love that. So I'm looking forward to what spools out, especially because I live in Illinois. I'm from Illinois. I got to call my rep, got to make sure this gets over the finish line. And I really appreciate you taking time to sort of lay all that out for us, because I think, when we do this, there's so little visibility on this type of work and how the sausage actually gets made and what it's like to actually, be going down to your state capital and just talking to people and stuff like that.
But I would tell you that pardon the interruption, but nobody was doing the work.
Yeah.
Before, right? I mean, I'm the pro-nuclear lobbyist in Illinois.
Yeah, you're the guy.
And I'm just a guy, right? I mean, and I have a day job, and it keeps me busy, 40 hours a week, and so I did take a day a couple of weeks ago to go down on that Tuesday when we had that hearing, and so I got up early, got the 519 Metro train, went down to the Amtrak station and rode the Amtrak down, and I was like Joe Biden, right?
Yeah.
Riding the Amtrak, and it was like a one-day trip that, where it started at 5, ended at 12:30 next morning when I got home. But it was so much fun. It was so energizing, like you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sorry I interrupted you. Were you on a roll there?
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I wanted to talk about just real briefly, if you could, because I don't want to keep you too long, but if you could fill us in what's been going on with the Episcopalians and nuclear. You're also seeing some victories there. You seem to be a pretty convincing guy,
those
Alan.
Crazy Episcopalians, right?
Yeah. Why don't you fill me in on that one?
Well, so I grew up Presbyterian, and I've been a person of faith really my whole life. I went through a kind of a fundamentalist phase that I'm not particularly proud of, but I have let's just say I'm recovering from more than one thing, right? So
right, yeah, okay, fair enough.
So so a few years ago, I started to talk to folks at my church because I'm, some of them are very good friends of mine, and so I would talk to them about nuclear energy. And one day, one of the assisting clergy said, "Hey, why don't you do a presentation on this, for us at some point?" So I wrote this, kind of a TED Talk sort of thing that I mashed together, and I got a presentation put together, and I recorded it, and it was very well received. I've always been very well received in my church because they know me, right?
Yeah,
they know me, they trust me, and I think most people in this country, if they haven't been talked to anybody about nuclear, you poll them, and that's the most they've heard about nuclear. Like, the part of the poll that talks about nuclear, that's what they've heard about nuclear, right?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
And they don't know anything else. Anyway, so a very gracious crowd, of course, and good questions, and so that was fun, but it was just people in my church. And so last year, actually 2021, we have every year in the Chicago area, we have the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago has a diocesan convention, and that's a yearly gathering where we get together and we do business, among other things, right? And we did this. We've been doing this virtually the last couple of years on Zoom. So in 2021, we did it. We did virtually, and a scant 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks before that event, it just occurred to me, hey, I could float a resolution to support nuclear energy, right? And
why not? Yeah, Go
I don't remember
for it.
where the idea came from, but it's I suppose I've probably been thinking about it, ruminating on it for a while. So anyway, so I went and I started to Google some things, and I found some examples of resolutions that were where I could find the structure of it and everything, and so I did that, and I ended up working with Andrew Smith at ANS, at the American Nuclear Society. Helped me with a bunch of the language in it, and so it basically just says we're saying we're going to we're asking that the resolution is asking our diocese to send delegates or deputies, they're called, to the General Convention, which happens every 3 years on a national level, right? And to propose to that convention that we endorse the use of nuclear energy to replace fossil fuels. And that's really it. I mean, there's some other language in there.
Sure.
And there's a whole bunch of background that's attached to the bill document, but it's not actually part of the actual resolution itself. It's not a bill. It's just a resolution. So I pitched that with very little prep in 2021, and it crashed and burned. Although, I mean, it got like 43% gay votes, but it was I was pretty crushed. I got to tell you, I was not. I was depressed for about 2 weeks after that. And, dark days in my soul. So anyway, I picked myself up, and or I should probably say that God picked me up, and started to work on it again for the next year. And for the next year in 2022, I actually got some stuff put together, and I spammed every parish office in the diocese at 120 churches, right? I sent them all the resolution with the accompanying information, and then a cover email that said, here's what I'm going to be proposing. I hope that you have a chance to take a look at it. If you have any questions, let me know. And here's 2 Zoom calls that you can log into at these times if you want to talk about it some more, if you have some concerns or whatever, right? So I only had one person that took me up on that, but I do think that helped, because when it got around to the vote, so I had some co-sponsors. So my priest of my church, she was the main sponsor because she was a delegate to this convention, and I was not this year. I was last year, but I wasn't this year. Right? And you have to be a voting delegate to be the sponsor of a resolution. So I was also a sponsor of it. And then the clergy guy I talked to you about that had encouraged me to do the talk, he's at a different church. He's retired, but he's at a different church right over in Glencoe. And he's very strongly pro-nuclear. Meaning he's mentioned my views from the pulpit before. So
wow.
So he really thinks it's a great thing, and we should do more of it. And then he connected me with, there's one other person at St. Luke's in Evanston that was just a layperson, but was also very strongly interested in this. And so we all, we had our names on the resolution, and it passed like 78% this past November. And I got, so the ANS said, hey, we're looking to do some work with the DOE, and we're responding to this RFP to talk to communities about hosting waste sites, because the DOE wants to find out how to engage communities. They want to develop a process to do that, so that people are want to do it, right?
Right.
So it's a consent-based siting. They talk about it, and anyway, so they were applying to get funding to do that, because the ANS feels like they could be a key player for that kind of thing. And so they said, hey, would you guys be willing to sign a letter, endorsing us because we helped you with this thing? And I'm like, well, we could try. So I sent it. So I talked to the bishops executive assistant downtown, and she got her own letter and she signed it.
There we go.
And then the ANS did a a complete profile of me in that whole process.
Yeah, they did some great coverage of
that. So put that in the show notes.
By the way, yeah, I was about to say you can find your Twitter and that in the show notes. That's fantastic.
So we have some work to do still. We have these deputies that are going to go off next July, like June, I guess it is June. And they're responsible for making this pitch, and they don't have to vote for it, right? I mean, they're still just individual voters, right? They can decide. So once we're past some other administrative kinds of stuff that has to be done, I'll be getting together with that group to talk to them about it, and make sure that they're as well prepared as they can be for it. I might go to that convention. I'm not sure yet.
Right.
It butts right up against a trip to Europe that my choir is doing, and I'll have to cut a day off of one of those two things to do that. Right. But anyway, that's so that was pretty exciting, and it's perhaps more more historically significant, I would say, than removing the moratorium. Lots of states are removing moratoriums, and ours is gonna at some point. I think it's gonna be this year, but if it's not, it'll be next year.
Right.
For sure. But I have not heard of any mainline progressive denomination.
No, and you and I. Yeah, you and I were talking about how back when I lived in Brattleboro, Vermont, I would see all these Universalist Unitarians and some other more progressive Protestant denominations with their Vermont Yankees closing bumper stickers driving around town. And that was before I really knew anything about nuclear. I just remember that, as I told you, a friend of mine mimicked the format and made a bumper sticker that said Yankee Candle is closing. And I used to have a big Yankee Candle is closing bumper sticker.
Yankee Candle, right?
Yeah. But on that note, Alan, I learned a ton from this, by example and just by content. This was really inspiring. This is such great work that you're doing. I really, really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And I'm glad you took time out of your day to talk to me about it.
Because I was looking forward to it, and I'm happy that we had a chance to do it. And also, I wanted to show off my nuclear plant.
Yeah, I saw that. That's so cool. So Alan has a great little nuclear plant in his background for those of you that are just doing the audio. Yeah.
And the atomic fireballs, which I give out when I go around to talk to legislators.
Oh, I love that gimmick. That's so good. Well, yeah, I guess it's better to give those out than warheads.
Yeah, probably. Although they're both bomb monikers, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. Well, okay. So Alan, thanks so much. Everybody, if you want to reach out to Alan, you can find all that in the show notes as always, and check out that ANS coverage of him. I thought it was really inspiring. So with that being said, stay sharp, stay strong, and stay radiant. We will see you next time.